On a cold, dark Halloween morning in 2015, Sergeant David of the Hayes Police Department arrived at the home of Diya Trickle, a 24-year-old woman who had just been reported as critically injured. What he found was a scene that would haunt him forever. Diya lay in bed near death, with a large-caliber revolver resting across her abdomen. She had been shot under the chin, and despite the efforts of first responders, she could not be saved. Her husband, Colby Trickle, stood on the porch, seemingly calm, as officers worked to save his wife's life. What followed was a complex investigation that would unravel a story of love, betrayal, and ultimately murder. When Sergeant David arrived at the Trickle residence on that cold Halloween morning in 2015, the scene before him was both chaotic and eerily still. The house was quiet, save for the muffled sounds of first responders working to save Diya Trickle's life. Hauptmann entered the bedroom and found Diya lying in bed, barely clothed, with a single gunshot wound under her chin. The .127 Magnum revolver, a heavy and intimidating firearm, lay across her abdomen, its presence both ominous and out of place. Hauptmann, trained to act quickly in life-or-death situations, moved the weapon aside and carefully carried Diya into the living room to perform CPR. Despite his efforts and those of the emergency medical team, it was too late. Diya was pronounced dead at the scene. Outside, Mark stood on the porch, his demeanor calm and almost unnervingly detached. When Hauptmann delivered the devastating news that Diya had not survived, Mark's reaction was subdued. He showed little emotion, a response that struck Hauptmann as unusual given the circumstances. Colby cooperated with officers, agreeing to go to the police station to provide a statement. His willingness to comply seemed almost too accommodating, raising the first subtle hints that something about his story didn't add up. At the station, Colby recounted the events of the previous night in a measured tone. He explained that Diya had come home from her job at Walmart, where she worked in the gardening center, and the couple had spent the evening playing video games together. Colby claimed he had gone to bed before Diya, leaving her alone in the living room. He said he was awakened by the sound of a gunshot and found Diya lying next to him in bed, fatally wounded. According to Colby, he immediately called 911 and, while on the phone with the dispatcher, checked Diya's pulse. Finding none, he picked up the revolver, briefly considered using it on himself, but ultimately placed it back on Diya's body before running outside to wait for help. At first glance, Mark's account seemed plausible, but as investigators began to piece together the details, inconsistencies emerged. The placement of the gun on Diya's abdomen struck them as odd. If Colby had just discovered his wife fatally wounded, why would he take the time to place the revolver back on her body before running outside? The weight and size of the .127 Magnum also raised questions. Diya, a petite woman, would have struggled to handle such a powerful firearm, making it an unlikely choice for a suicide. Additionally, investigators noted that Diya had set an alarm for the next morning, a small but significant detail that suggested she had plans for the future and no intention of ending her life. Mark's calm demeanor and the peculiarities of his story began to paint a picture that didn't quite fit the narrative of a grieving husband. As investigators dug deeper, they would uncover a web of lies, betrayal, and hidden motives that would ultimately reveal the truth behind Diya's tragic death. The scene of the crime, once thought to be a straightforward case of suicide, would become the starting point for a complex and chilling investigation into love, betrayal, and murder. From the outset, investigators were skeptical of Mark's account. Detective J.B. Burkholder, who responded to the scene, noted several inconsistencies. First, the placement of the gun on Diya's body seemed odd. If Colby had just discovered his wife fatally wounded, why would he place the gun back on her abdomen before running outside? Second, the weapon itself, a large, heavy point .127 Magnum, seemed an unlikely choice for a petite woman like Diya to use in a suicide. Burkholder also noted that Diya had set an alarm for the next morning, a detail that didn't align with someone planning to take their own life. Diya's family was equally skeptical. Her aunt and uncle, Stephen and Joshua, were devastated by her death and adamant that she would never have committed suicide. They described Diya as a joyful, optimistic person who loved her family and her 2 dogs. She had plans for the future, including starting a pet boarding business, and had shown no signs of depression or despair. The Kevin also revealed that they had long been concerned about Mark controlling behavior. They said he often demanded Diya's constant attention and became frustrated if she didn't immediately respond to his texts or calls. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a series of troubling details about Colby Trickle. First, they discovered that he had been having an online affair with another woman. Text messages revealed flirtatious and explicit conversations, some of which occurred just hours after Diya's death. Colby admitted to the relationship, but claimed it was purely virtual, and that Diya had never found out about it. Second, investigators found evidence that Colby had researched life insurance policies just days before Diya's death. He had Googled the payout amount for a policy that covered spouses of military members, contradicting his initial claim that he had no life insurance on Diya. When confronted, Colby suggested that Diya might have conducted the search herself, but surveillance footage from Walmart showed that Diya was at work at the time the search was made. Third, the placement of the gun in the couple's bedroom raised questions. Colby claimed that Diya kept the revolver on her side of the bed, but photos from his phone showed the weapon on his side. Investigators also noted that the gun's position at the scene, with the sight mark under Diya's chin at an unnatural angle for a right-handed person, suggested that someone else had fired the weapon. Despite the mounting evidence, the case hit a roadblock when the coroner, Lyle Nordhook, ruled Diya's death a suicide. This determination limited investigators' ability to obtain search warrants and delayed the case for nearly 2 years. However, in 2019, newly elected County Attorney Robert Anderson decided to pursue a novel approach, a psychological autopsy. Anderson hired forensic psychologist Dr. Ashley Christensen to analyze Diya's state of mind in the days leading up to her death. Christensen interviewed family members, friends, and co-workers, and reviewed Diya's social media and text messages. Her conclusion was clear. Diya was at a low risk for suicide. She had been making plans for the future, discussing her pet boarding business, and showing no signs of despair. Christensen's report would become a key piece of evidence at Mark's trial. In September 2021, Mark stood trial for the murder of his wife, Diya Trickle, in a case that had captivated the community and drawn national attention. The courtroom was tense as prosecutors laid out their case, painting a picture of a man driven by greed, infidelity, and a desire to maintain control over his wife. They argued that Colby had killed Diya for three primary reasons: his ongoing affair with another woman, his frustration over losing control of Diya as she began to assert her independence, and the financial gain he stood to receive from her life insurance policy. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of compelling evidence. They presented text messages and digital records that revealed Mark's online affair, which had continued even in the hours following Diya's death. These messages showed a man who was emotionally detached from his wife and preoccupied with his new romantic interest. The timing of the messages, some sent just hours after Diya's death, was particularly damning, as it suggested Mark's focus was not on grieving, but on pursuing his own desires. Another key piece of evidence was Mark's Google search history. Just days before Diya's death, he had searched for information about life insurance payouts, specifically policies that covered spouses of military members. This contradicted his initial claim that he had no life insurance on Diya. Surveillance footage from Walmart confirmed that Diya was at work at the time of the search, effectively disproving Mark's suggestion that she might have conducted the search herself. The prosecution argued that this evidence pointed to premeditation, showing that Colby had researched the financial benefits of Diya's death before killing her. The physical evidence from the crime scene also played a crucial role in the trial. Prosecutors highlighted the odd placement of the .127 Magnum revolver on Diya's abdomen, a detail that seemed inconsistent with Mark's account of events. They brought in forensic experts who testified that the angle of the gunshot wound, under Diya's chin and slightly to the left, was inconsistent with a self-inflicted injury, especially for a right-handed person like Diya. The experts suggested that the trajectory of the bullet indicated the gun had been fired by someone else, likely while Diya was lying down and unaware. The prosecution also emphasized the inconsistencies in Mark's story. His claim that he had placed the gun back on Diya's body before running outside struck investigators as suspicious, as did his calm and detached demeanor in the aftermath of her death. Witnesses, including Diya's family and friends, testified about her joyful and optimistic personality, countering the defense's argument that she had been depressed or suicidal. They described her plans for the future, including her dream of starting a pet boarding business, and insisted that she had shown no signs of wanting to end her life. Mark's defense team, however, fought back vigorously. They argued that Diya's death was a tragic suicide and pointed to the coroner's initial ruling as evidence. They suggested that the psychological autopsy conducted by Dr. Ashley Christensen was unreliable and biased, emphasizing that Diya had struggled with undisclosed mental health issues. The defense also attempted to downplay the significance of Mark's affair and Google searches, framing them as unrelated to Diya's death. Despite the defense's efforts, the prosecution's case was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before reaching a verdict. Mark was guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and sorrow as Diya's family embraced, their long fight for justice finally over. The trial was not just a legal proceeding, but a reckoning, a moment that exposed the dark undercurrents of control, betrayal, and violence that had defined Colby and Diya's relationship. For Diya's loved ones, the verdict was a bittersweet victory, a reminder of the life that had been lost, but also a step toward healing. For the community, it was a stark reminder of the dangers of domestic violence and the importance of holding abusers accountable. And for Colby Trickle, it was the end of a carefully constructed facade, a final reckoning for the lies and violence that had shattered so many lives. In the days following the verdict, Diya's family expressed a mix of emotions. While they were relieved that Colby had been held accountable, the pain of losing Diya remained raw. Her aunt, Stephen Rice, spoke to the media, thanking the investigators, prosecutors, and jury for their dedication to uncovering the truth. Diya was a light in our lives, and her death left a void that can never be filled, she said. But today, we feel that justice has been served. Colby, meanwhile, maintained his innocence. In a brief statement before his sentencing, he admitted that he could have been a better husband, but insisted that he did not kill Diya. "I cannot apologize for what I didn't do," he said, his voice steady but devoid of emotion. His words did little to sway public opinion, as the evidence against him had been too compelling to ignore. The case also sparked broader conversations about the challenges of prosecuting intimate partner homicides, particularly when initial investigations are mishandled. Diya's death certificate had originally listed her cause of death as suicide, a determination that delayed the case for nearly 2 years. Coroner Lyle Nordhook later admitted that he had made his ruling without all the facts, a mistake that underscored the need for better collaboration between law enforcement and medical examiners. Diya's family vowed to continue advocating for victims of domestic violence, ensuring that her legacy would live on. They established the Diya Trickle Foundation, which provides resources and support for individuals in abusive relationships. Through their efforts, they hope to prevent other families from experiencing the same pain and loss. As Mark began his life sentence, the story of Diya's death served as a sobering reminder of the complexities of love, betrayal, and justice. While the trial had ended, the impact of her life and the fight to honor her memory would continue to resonate for years to come. On November 20th, 2021, Mark was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 45 years. In his statement to the court, he admitted that he could have been a better husband, but maintained his innocence. "I cannot apologize for what I didn't do," he said. For Diya's family, the verdict brought a sense of closure. They remembered her as a loving, joyful person who'd been taken from them far too soon. Her cousin, Jacob, wrote a song in her memory, a tribute to the young woman who had touched so many lives. The case also prompted changes in how such investigations are conducted. Coroner Lyle Nordhook admitted that he had made his determination of suicide without all the facts, and later amended Diya's death certificate to reflect her death as a homicide. Investigators acknowledged that they should have done a better job of sharing information with the coroner. The death of Diya Trickle is a tragic reminder of the complexities of domestic violence and the lengths some will go to conceal their crimes. What began as a seemingly straightforward suicide investigation revealed a web of lies, betrayal, and greed. Thanks to the persistence of investigators and the innovative use of a psychological autopsy, justice was finally served. Diya's family can now begin to heal, knowing that the man responsible for her death will spend the rest of his life behind bars.